Welcome, everybody. I am calling this meeting to order. The Santa Barbara Airport Commission meeting has begun. And before I get started, I'd like to extend a hearty welcome to Paul Bowen. Paul, it feels like you never left, but we're glad to have you back on the commission.
Thank you. And I never left. I was just sitting over
Yes.
there in the visitors section.
Yes, and although he's not here today, a hearty welcome to our other new commissioner, Steve Gregg. And he already had this time booked before he was appointed by the city council. So we are letting him off, even though it is his very first meeting. So, Mo, I think we should probably get down to business,
Sure.
and perhaps we can do the roll call.
Good evening, commissioners. And like Chair Houghton said, Steve Gregg is excused, and also Commissioner Miller is excused tonight. Commissioner Maya,
Here.
Commissioner Bowen,
Here.
Commissioner Grabman,
Here.
Vice Chair Glazier,
Here.
and Chair Houghton.
Here.
And we have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Mr. Hastert, first item on our list here today, any changes to the agenda?
No changes, Chair Houghton.
All right, we will continue to move along here. Number 2, notices that on Friday, January 10, 2025 at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary, Mo Graham, duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at the Airport Administration. For members of the public, we welcome you here. I'd love to see you here. If you have questions that are not on the agenda, this is your time to speak. And we ask that you fill out a speaker comment card, and we will then recognize you, and you have up to 3 minutes to speak on the topic of your interest. Mo, do you have any speaker request cards yet? I do not. Okay. Because from this point forward, it has to be an agenda item if you're going to speak. All right, doesn't look like we have any areas there. So I'm going to just keep moving along here, and the first commission matter is one that I hold near and dear. I've had the pleasure of being your chair for the last 2 years, and I have to say it's been a very enjoyable experience. As a result of this experience, when I meet young people and they're thinking about vocations and their employment, I encourage them to look at municipal government. I've had such a great experience being the chair of the Airport Commission the last 2 years that I encourage young people to explore opportunities in their individual cities. And Santa Barbara is probably one of the best run cities that you could work for. And so I just wanted to say that I've enjoyed this experience, but it's time to move on. So, that we have term limits, and so under the municipal code, a chair can only serve for 2 consecutive years, and each commissioner can only serve for 2 consecutive 4-year terms. So we are at this transition period where we pass the baton. So with my fellow commission members, I'd like to ask for a motion for chair and vice chair. Commissioner Grabman.
Yes, I would like to make a motion to have Dan Glazier as the chair and then Levi, Maya, as vice chair.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
I'd like to second that motion.
Oh, very good. All seconds. I'd like to open this up to further discussion to the commission, but I think unless Vice Chair Glazier and Commission Member Maya don't object, we can move forward with a vote.
I have no objections, Chair.
All right.
Chair, you want to do public comment before you vote?
I do. That was the next thing. Do we have any members of the public that would like to comment on these potential candidates? Okay. All right. So then I'm going to ask for a vote. All those who are in favor of electing Dan Glazier Ann as chair and Levi Maya as vice chair, please vote. All in favor, aye.
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 It is unanimous. I have the pleasure of passing the iPad to Chairman Glazer. Congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
you all very much.
Congratulations, Vice Chair Maya.
Congrats. And just real briefly, I wanted to thank Chair Houghton. You have done quite a service to the community by the last 2 years. Your calm and positive leadership, while really challenging us to dream big, has been, welcomed by all of us, the community, and certainly I think the staff here at the airport has really appreciated your time here. So thank you for your commitment. Thank you for your leadership and the steady hand that you've had for the past 2 years. So
Thank you.
Thank you. Moving along, liaison reports. Call on Councilman Friedman.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your service, outgoing Chair. So 2 years, it's great leadership there, and welcome back to our commissioners. The commissioners coming back, and really want to welcome everyone. Hope you all had a great New Year. The council, we had our first meeting yesterday, so we do have a new city council member, Wendy Santa Maria, representing the east side. So yesterday was the official first meeting. And then we did our boards of commission, so I was reappointed to serve as the liaison for this commission. And being that we have a full agenda, I will keep it at that.
Thank you, Councilman Friedman. At this time, I'd like to call on your airport director. Director Hastert, can we receive your report?
Thank you, Chair Glazer. Just have a few items. I was actually out of town quite a bit during the holidays and at a conference. So first, I'd just like to thank Sarah Isa for filling in for me while I was out and keeping everything running very smoothly. But then also all of the staff just did an amazing job while I was out. And I'm especially also coordinating for this meeting through emails a lot. So thank you. We've had some change with some of the staff here at the airport. So I'd like to start just by introducing Tess Musgrave, our planning technician, standing right over here. She's come on to help us with some of our projects. We have a lot of capital projects going on, and we needed a little bit of extra help with some of that planning effort. So definitely happy to have her helping. But then we've also had some promotions here at the airport. I think I had previously mentioned Greg Goodsell switching over to airport property supervisor. That freed up an airport operations supervisor position. And obviously when John Feldhans was promoted to properties manager, that freed up a second operations supervisor position. So we now have David Iglesias and Robert Blackstone, who are have been promoted from senior airport operations up to operations supervisors and just doing an amazing job. Today was the second day for Mr. Blackstone, who has been on the night shift for 7 years. So it's interesting to see him back around the office and good. And that's also created some upward movement with some of our other operations staff into the senior position, and then an opening for some of the entry-level operations, which I believe we have over 40 applicants for right now. So a lot of movement and good promotional opportunities for some of our existing staff who does such a good job. With that, I just wanted to move on to the next. I am trying to be more involved with the community, and so I'm happy to report that I will be a chamber board member starting in February. So look forward to that interaction with the chamber. I already have some good interaction with Visit Santa Barbara, but I feel that I could learn a lot more about some of the businesses in the community and how the airport is affected by those businesses in good and bad ways, and work with them. Airline service, we continually to monitor what's going on. As I mentioned in a previous meeting, Southwest had pulled some of the Denver flights. Those are back on the schedule coming in the summer. But in the meantime, United has added flights, I believe, starting in April. I'd have to check the exact schedule. It keeps on changing a little bit. But going up to 6 times daily to San Francisco from 4 times, and going to 3 times daily to Denver from the current 2 times. So as much as we see things change around with the airlines, every month our numbers continue to grow, and we set records every month. Luckily, we made it through the holidays. Parking seemed to be okay, and we're definitely at a much slower period now. If you go look at the terminal, it almost feels abandoned after seeing all of the holiday rush. But we need a little bit of time to recover. So for those of you that may be in touch with some of the people that flew through and maybe had some small complaints, we've had some issues with the escalator and some bag belts and other things, but I'm happy to report our staff is on those now. I think the bag belt will be fixed tomorrow and the escalator next Tuesday if all goes well. So definitely some issues with a building that's reached 13 years old. Doesn't sound that old, but a lot of that equipment starts to have some failures. So happy that our team is working on that. And then we also have a jet bridge that's currently out of service right now, undergoing an upgrade in all of the controls. And as you know, even with computer upgrades and other things, there's always some challenges. So it hasn't gone quite as smoothly as we would like it to, but we had the expert fly in today. So hopefully that will be fixed as well. And that's all. I'll leave it at that for the director's report.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the consent calendar. Oh, sorry. Do you have any questions for Director?
I have one question for you, Director Hastert. I heard some rumblings through the pilot community about an increased minimums for the ILS, and I'm wondering how you anticipate that might affect the operations at the airport, particularly as we approach spring and summer, where we tend to get a lower marine layer.
Thank you for that, Vice Chair Maya. I actually meant to mention that, but I scrolled my notes too quickly. So we were made aware of an obstruction for the approach flying into runway 7, and it was a couple of trees that are in the industrial area on that approach many months ago. And moved very quickly. Our operations staff actually worked with the property owner. Those trees were actually removed. It's quite the process with the FAA to update their system, let them know that the trees were removed. And during that whole process, they had already been working on modifying the approach, which does end up with an increased minimum to the airport approach. And as much effort as we have taken to try to stop that you can't stop that process once it is going. So we're very hopeful that within a cycle or two of future updates to the approaches, that will go back to the existing minimums. And I'll keep you advised as we hear more communications back and forth. They also made a few changes, I think, unrelated to those obstacles coming in to the departures, which the Noise Working Group has discussed. And we haven't really commented one way or the other on those because they do have the potential to help with the noise problem depending on aircraft performance, because it does turn you out in a different way. So we're going to wait and see what the impact of that is and make more comment on that if needed. But it could potentially be a good thing at this point.
And I didn't mean to use jargon, but maybe you can explain for the benefit of the public what increased minimums means for operations of commercial airline flights in and out of the airport particularly.
Yeah, thank you. So all of our airlines are flying in on instrument approaches, and there's several different types of instrument approaches, GPS approaches, radio signals off of a VOR up at San Marcos and Gaviota. But our primary approach in inclement weather, meaning fog and reduced visibility, is the instrument landing system. And that gets you down to approximately 200 feet above the ground. And so those aircraft are able to go all the way down to basically 200 feet above the ground. And if they are able to see the runway environment, they can continue and land. If they're not, then they have to do a missed approach, and they can either try again or they can divert to another airport. So that number of the 200 is being increased. So the likelihood that they will still be in the fog or the marine layer goes up with that higher altitude. So it could potentially cause more diversions or delays or cancellations. We're hopeful, you always hear about June gloom, so hopefully it would be fixed before then. But we've had some very strange weather, even with the fog that we've had in December, and quite a bit of diversions even in December. So we're hopeful that we can get the FAA to time it to where we don't have those diversions, but it just by a matter of that few feet that it's being increased, it could result in some diversions.
Thank you.
Commissioner? No, sorry, go ahead.
Is there someone that the public can contact to write an email or concerns about the higher minimums?
So thank you for that question. I don't think at this point there's anything else that can be done. We actually had reached out to our local congressman as well, Salud Carbajal, and had his support to try to work on this issue. The FAA system is such, and I understand the system because you don't want to make very quick changes to things going on because you don't want to overlook something and jeopardize safety. So as much as I know that those trees are gone and nothing else is going to be done, the FAA has to go through their process to make sure that they don't do something that's going to jeopardize safety, and that process unfortunately takes some time.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a more trivial question. Are we live streaming these meetings?
So the goal is always to live stream these meetings. With technology issues, we've had some problems with that in the past. I could check. I believe we are live streaming it today and at the last meeting as well. So yeah, I'm getting the nod that yes, we are. That is the goal, is to always live stream the meetings, but being remote from the city downtown area has caused some technology issues in the past, but it sounds like they've got those worked out.
That's good news. I've had several people contacting me saying they were disappointed they didn't think they'd be able to live stream. So that's good news. Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Do we have any new speaker slips? Does anyone else have any comments on the director's report? Seeing none after a count of 3, I think we can move on. I apologize for jumping the gun on this one a little bit. Moving on to the consent calendar. Commissioners, do you have any questions or clarifications on the consent calendar? Seeing none, I take it no more speaker slips. Does anyone have any comments on the consent calendar? Anything they had more clarification on? Just wanted to take a moment and say thank you guys for all being here. We certainly appreciate having the public here and giving us input and helping us, make sure that we're looking at the right things too. So thank you for being here. Certainly happy to have a voice from the public. So seeing none, we'll move along. I'd like to call for a motion and a second for the consent calendar.
I move we approve the consent calendar.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Appears to be unanimous. Moving on to the administrative reports. Director Hastert.
Thank you, Chair Glazer. The first one that we have teed up is the update on the FBO redevelopment and our RFP that we have drafted to put out. And so this is an exciting meeting. We have noise working group update, FBO update, and climate updates. So for those of you that complained at the last meeting that it went too fast, we've tried to switch that around for you. So we have been working since I've actually started here on a draft RFP for the FBOs, and there's a number of challenges that were identified as we go through this. And so I just want to give you a brief update. We did not provide a draft of the RFP to you because it is a work in progress, but it is also a document that we keep in-house and don't want spreading out to potential proposers to get an inside advantage of what may be in those RFPs and all of that. So if you will bear with me a little bit, I will try to answer any questions that you may have. I will definitely take your feedback that you want to provide. There may be things that I will just let you know that those are things that we don't yet want to release that information yet, and we can work that out as we go through the presentation. So the purpose of the FBO, we went through a master plan update in 2017, and that identified the FBO area, which is on the northwest corner of the airport, kind of where we are sitting right now, for 2 FBOs, and we currently have 2 FBOs. So RFP is a request for proposals, and so both of our FBOs are on short-term leases right now, which does not allow them to recoup the capital investment required to make improvements to those facilities. Now, they do a good job of maintaining their facilities and actually making some improvements on their own, but the large capital investment that really needs to go into this airport for our FBO facilities isn't going to happen until we do a long-term lease with the FBOs. And so we need to go through a process to select who those FBOs are And so they would be operating full service FBOs. This initial RFP, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, is only for the east site. So of this northeast corner of the airport, it's kind of split up into 2 areas for FBOs, and I will show you that in just a minute. We want to make sure that all of this aligns with our master plan and sustainability and all of the community benefits that we are looking for. And it will obviously offer aeronautical services that meet the minimum standards to be able to provide fuel here on the airport as well. So a question that comes up quite often is, why are we issuing an RFP? Does it mean that we're not happy with our current FBOs, or are we looking for something different? And I can unequivocally answer that with, no, our FBOs are great, nationally known FBOs, do a tremendous job of serving our transient aircraft and local tenants out of aging facilities, because we haven't allowed them to have those long-term leases and make that investment. So nothing to do with our current FBOs and the reason why. But the RFP process does allow, and I think I have this on the next one, to go through, our normal compliance with procurement best practices, because we are selecting FBOs for potentially 30 to 50-year leases, depending on the investment here into the airport. So this is a huge decision to be made for the companies that we will be working with for decades, and to look at the facilities that they will be putting in. It does encourage competition as well, so everybody's going to sharpen their pencils a little bit and come up with the best proposals. Long-term viability for the airport. But the most important part is the last bullet that you see on here, which is transparency and community confidence. Their FBO selections sometimes become somewhat controversial at other airports, and there's a lot of politics involved and complaints and lawsuits that are filed and things like that. So we want to make sure that our process that we go through to select the 2 long-term tenants for our FBOs here is a fair process that everybody has the ability to put in a proposal for. We will be putting together a selection panel to go over those, make a recommendation to the commission, then ultimately to the city council, and then bring back the leases for those FBOs as well. But a very important process that really steers the direction of this airport. The airline terminal is pretty well set, other than the terminal improvement project. This is the most major project that will probably come before this commission, and the most important. So I've been asked this question many times, is why is it taking so long to get this RFP out the door? And so there's a lot of challenges that I've identified, and I think my predecessors have identified, and some of those I have listed here. So one is, even though I mentioned that the FBOs are on short-term leases, the lease dates don't align with the lease dates for the fuel farm, which are even longer currently than what the FBO leases are. And there's just a lot of questions related to how do you move an FBO into an area where there's an existing FBO? And so there's just so many questions that you have to answer. Other factors that come into it is this building. We are right in the middle, and you'll see in a minute I have a diagram, but we're right in the middle of the area where it's prime FBO real estate that would serve the general aviation customers well for Santa Barbara. So we also need to plan to relocate our administration, and luckily we have another vacant building that should meet that need. We have to address the current facilities. So everybody that's proposing has to understand what the facilities are existing that they're proposing. So we have a facilities condition report that has been completed, will be a part of this RFP as well. So we want to disclose as much information as possible. I mentioned the fuel farm leases are different terms than our FBO leases, and so we want to include the fuel farm leases in the master lease for the FBO, so that they will be combined moving forward. We have a lease for the self-serve, and because we have 2 different FBOs, we don't know what the proposals will be from each one of them. We're going to handle the self-serve as a separate process because it's likely it may benefit one of the FBOs better than another, depending on what their focus is. They may be more or less focused on the smaller GA or the ability to provide fuels. Also, we don't know what's going to happen with unleaded aviation fuel yet, and that could factor into some of that as well. So we're keeping separate for now because it just added a little bit of confusion with 1 self-serve tank and 2 FBO sites. We wanted to set expectations, and I'm not going to go much into this because I have another slide, but I've heard from a lot of former commissioners, tenants, we should be regulating what the fuel prices are and a lot of other things, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. And then just a comprehensive amount of information that we had to gather, to put together, to provide all of that information to anybody who may propose, also specifically related to what the development process is within the city of Santa Barbara. And so there's obviously the normal hurdles that you would go through for any development, but Santa Barbara with architectural review and things like that can stretch out just a little bit longer. So we want to make sure everybody is very informed as to what they are getting into when we look to move forward with a successful proposer. And then, as I mentioned, every single time I think we are done, there are questions that come up that honestly we can't answer right now. And some of those questions depend on who is selected. And so what we would like to do now is get this out and select somebody for the east site, because that will start the domino effect of what do we need to now fix, or what else do we need to update? Do we need to make a further update to our ALP? Do we need to do some of these other things? Do we need to negotiate with a current FBO over the leases that aren't quite expired yet? So there's just a lot of questions that can't be answered. And some of those questions, and we're not factoring that into the selection, are easier depending on which FBO is selected. I mean, obviously, if it's a current FBO, some of those questions just go away. But we want to be fair in the process and how we look at that. So we need to go out and find who we will be working with, starting with the east site, and then I'll talk about the west site shortly. So when I mention east site FBO, you can see from this diagram, and I apologize, do you know if this is the newest one or if this is 2017? Sorry, I should have looked at that. It's the newest one. Okay, so happy to report we're using the latest drawing. We tried to split the two sites up fairly equally, so you see two parcels, about 22.6 acres and 22.4 acres. And so the east site, obviously the one on the right, is the one that we are starting with. And one of the challenges that we have is we're looking for two operators. Both of them need to do significant construction. Both of them need to operate an FBO as they are going through this process. So if we put both of them out at the same time, I don't see anything but chaos happening with what's going on. We don't have enough extra property to maintain two FBOs under construction and still serve all of the aircraft flying in and out. So we're focused on initially the east site. The other thing that does is, if you look at the two sites, one of the concerns that is continually brought up to me is what is going to happen with all of the small GA tenants that are either on tie downs or in hangars. And so if you look at the west site, it's very obvious that if somebody's going to build an FBO facility in that area, with even just with the administrative buildings, there's going to be a loss of some of those small T hangars. So if we've already got a proposal that works well for the east site and that's under development, hopefully they can take some of that demand from displaced tenants from the west site during construction of the west site, or be able to utilize still the existing FBO. So you currently have Signature is on the east site. Atlantic is off of this entire area. So for Atlantic to continue to operate that facility is much easier. For Signature to operate is going to be a little bit more challenging, or whoever may go into those facilities. Okay, thank you. So the way that the RFP is drafted currently is the focus is really on the northern portion of the east site. So all of the current ramp space all the way up through where the restaurant is and where our building is. However, the lower portion where it says the 22.4 acres is an option that is available for them to propose on if they have a larger scale development that they want to initially bring. So it could be something that is phased. So you could see proposals come in just for that north portion, and then the southern portion would be a second phase. Or ultimately, the way the draft lease is written, if an FBO doesn't desire that much space or isn't needed through their proposals, within a certain period of time, that would revert back to the airport to be able to move forward with other types of developments. So I think in just discussions with current and prospective FBOs, I think we're likely to probably see that they want the whole space, but we don't want to dictate what space they have to take to make their operation work. And we really look forward to what their proposals are to see how that best works for Santa Barbara, and if there's space left over to meet a demand, whether it be for small general aviation or aircraft or something else, then that space could come back to the airport if it's not utilized. So when we look at what is going into this RFP and what are we asking for, there's a lot of, as I mentioned, people want us to look at fuel prices. They want us to look at how many small general aviation hangars are being put in. The RFP is focused on the minimum. So we have minimum standards, and in those minimum standards, it dictates what the facilities are required to provide a full service FBO here at the Santa Barbara Airport. And so that is the base. So that is the requirements. They must meet the minimum standards. Now, all of them know what the fleet mix is here. They know who their customers are. They know the local aircraft information. We're providing all of that information to them, master plan, everything. So then you get into the nice to haves. So the nice to haves would be more small GA tenants hangars or more business jet hangars. We have a huge demand even for some of the larger business jets, all the way up to a Boeing business jet. So that's where the proposals that come in, that's the area that we can really evaluate and rank one proposal higher than another because they're providing above that level that is required in the minimum standards. And then, as I mentioned on here, the restrictions of what we can't ask for is there are certain things with the FAA that we can't dictate to the FBO, you know, how much they charge, other things, especially when we're not reducing their rate and they have to pay the rent to the airport, which is actually fairly significant. So if they're not able to run their business and have the flexibility to charge what they need to for their facility, and with the cost of facilities right now, our estimate that we have in our calculations continues to rise with what new construction costs for hangars and in office space. So in the current RFP, I mentioned I don't want to give away a lot of information because we want to keep this a fair process, but this is generic enough. I thought I could pull it out and share it, and this is where I would like some discussion from the commission as well to make sure that we're kind of on the right track. So some of the criteria that we have would be for a financial plan. Obviously, we want to make sure that whoever we're going to be in business with has the financial ability to be successful, both with the construction of the facilities, but then just operating in general and paying their lease and all of that. The development plan. So this would be the proposer for where are you putting hangars, where are you putting offices, if there's other things associated with that, how is the facility laid out? Business plan. So there's a number of different ways to meet the minimum standards. Some of them require, other businesses. So are they partnering up with other businesses to provide services? Are they providing those services on their own? DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, obviously that's something that's been fairly important for a lot of things in the industry lately. And then community benefits. So this could be anything from local economic impact, job creation, environmental stewardship, as I mentioned, sustainable aviation fuel and unleaded avgas, things like that. So these are all things that we want to evaluate these proposals from. So in the draft proposal, it's not question marks on those percentages. We actually have a staff, recommended what those are. But I would turn to the commission now and ask for some guidance for what you feel some of the heavier weighted areas should be. And so we can compare that with what we currently have on there and fine tune this RFP before it goes out.
Mr. Hester, I'll kick this off. You know me, I like to think big, but I think that development plan, I'm hoping that these companies will move forward with very well thought out and creative, modern architectural plans that meet the needs of their customers, but also symbolizes our heritage here at the airport, that these are pretty buildings to look at, not big square monoliths painted gray. I'm hoping to see something that's attractive.
So I want to say Chair Houghton, but Commissioner Houghton. One thing that I just want to caution you is this is something we'll also talk about the amount of time for them to respond. I know that there's probably some FBOs out there that have been putting a lot of time looking at this and may have some prettier drawings, but really I anticipate it's going to be a little bit more of a general layout. But the architectural, believe me, is going to go through our architectural board of review, and there's going to be a lot of input that comes into that. But I just wanted to put that out there. I want to make sure we set our expectations. They're going to have at most 90-ish days to put this together, so you're probably not going to see some major architectural renderings. Some of them may have that, but just want to put that out there.
As the years have gone by, I've seen 4 airport directors working on this, so it has taken us a long time. One of the things that's rarely addressed is access to these FBOs from Hollister. And people have commented over the years to me, they fly in on executive jet and they feel like they're being whisked away through a back alley. So something that we can offer to whatever FBOs get selected is good access onto Hollister, perhaps their own private parking area, or good ways for the limousines to come and go. So just trying to sweeten the deal to make it more viable for them. But to answer your question, for me, business plan is a huge part. We want successful FBOs. Thank you.
I would echo Commissioner Bowen's comments just from a financial, because that's kind of my tilt on this, but thinking about how grandiose anyone's plans might be and then comparing that to the feasibility, just given, the size of the project, and certainly, like you said, construction costs are going through the roof and change every day, labor costs as well. So just making sure that there is some understanding of the financial flexibility of whomever is successful ultimately, I think is very, very important. So, agreed.
I feel a little bit like it's a game show where, what is it, Family Feud, where we have to guess what's behind these question marks here. I'm kind of interested. Now I want to see what the staff has said, so I guess I'll have to wait till next episode for that. But
So that may change based on the conversation that we have here, but I'm happy to share with what the initial staff was after it's issued.
So I'm going to jump in and say community benefits, because I think Santa Barbara Airport is in a unique situation where a mid-sized airport, we serve the community both as a regional hub for air transportation for commercial airlines as well as general aviation. And I'd like to see, I know that the FBOs in their duty serve general aviation, but within that we've got business jets and executive flyers, and we also have a fairly vibrant small piston GA community. And I want to make sure that the interests of both GA communities, which can seem like two different communities, are balanced in a way where we don't ignore the needs of the small piston group as well. So I know we've got issues with eliminating lead from the fuel, and I want to make sure that those particular issues are addressed in this RFP. And so I think that would probably fall under community benefits. I know there's a lot of rumblings around the state and around the country to eliminate lead from avgas, and so I'd want to be sure that anybody who comes in has a clear, cogent plan for doing that, as well as just not pricing small GA out of the Santa Barbara market.
Commissioners, any other questions? Clarifications?
I have one more comment. Got to be planning for the future. We're talking 40-year, 50-year leases. Wow. I had the pleasure of getting to know futurist Alvin Toffler over years, and he made his living predicting the future, and he says it's impossible. But we do know that the future will bring us electric and hydrogen-powered aircraft. I would hope the FBOs would have some comment or some discussion of their plans for future fuels for the industry.
I think both FBOs do have, on their fuel trucks, they have information on like how they're being more eco-friendly. So I think that both of them are taking steps towards being in the positive way of
So-
environmental impact.
So Commissioner Graham, if I might add, I would agree with you. I think both of our current FBOs, like I mentioned, they're doing an amazing job. They're nationally known FBOs. It could be very small FBOs that apply for this that maybe aren't taking those challenges, and that's why it's important for me to hear from the commission as to what those important things are. Because if our current FBOs are doing that, and we take a step backwards and it's not meeting the needs by not picking somebody who does these, that would be where we want to be careful.
And I think too, that a lot of them do a lot of community outreach and help with the local community in town now, and I think that's an important thing, that, you know, they're help with just outreach to kids, and you know, they're part of the Chamber of Congress, and I think both of them are really involved in the community already, which is great.
Definitely. Plate and pole, a lot of other fun things.
Would it be appropriate to ask questions on other parts of the?
So I do have a little bit more
Okay.
to present that
Then we'll
might
wait till
answer
the
a couple of
end.
those
Yeah.
questions,
Mhm.
but I just wanted to pause on this slide since it was
Mhm.
up there and not have to go back to it. So the second thing that I wanted a little bit of feedback on is the timeline. So I will share with you our draft timeline right now currently in the draft RFP is 90 days. So once we issue this, the proposers have 90 days to put their package together and submit it to the city. In discussions with both our current FBOs as well as other people just in the FBO industry that I've talked to, that may be a little bit on the long side. And so I just wanted to get your feedback. I think that, you know, we could do as short as 45 days all the way up to that 90 days, but somewhere 45 or 60 days is actually in the realm of still allowing enough time for somebody to propose and keep this process moving. But I would like your comments to see if it's something that you think longer is still better, or if we are just really wanting to keep this moving. And I think that most of the people that are interested have probably had their eye on this for a while and wouldn't require that full 90 days.
From my past experience with very complex RFPs, a lot of it depends on what information goes to the people that are going to do the RFPs. If the airport staff gives them a very clear package of what's available to them, then the shorter timeline probably works.
I can assure you that this is going to be a very thick RFP packet, not in what they have to respond to, but in information that we are providing to them. So I will say it's very comprehensive with what
Good to hear.
is going out.
Uh, 60 days sounds, you know, with very little knowledge on the topic and how RFPs are put together and what you're requesting back. 60 days seems reasonable to me, but I mean, I'm open to other suggestions as well.
I have to imagine that folks who are interested in this sort of thing are coming out of the gate running and probably are filling in the blanks based on some of the information, but that a lot of it is going to be fairly industry standard. So, I mean, 45, 60, I think 90 is probably too long, but that's an uneducated guess on my part.
Thank you. Okay, I'll keep on going. So I also wanted to just set expectations, one with our commission, but just the general audience who may be here tonight or watching this meeting is this is not going to be a fast process, even once we select a successful proposer. Outside of finalizing the negotiations on the lease and getting all of that signed and getting things going, just skipping over all the details that are provided in this, you can see at the bottom, it's probably going to be 2.5 to 3 years to get to the point where we're really moving forward with construction of these new facilities. Now, obviously, there's ways to expedite things and keep things moving faster, but it's not going to be vastly different from that time frame, and honestly could take longer depending on the expertise of the architectural teams and other people and their success in going through our process with the Architectural Board of Review and those changes that are needed and the amount of time between those submissions. So I just wanted to set expectations that this is not going to be, as soon as you select an FBO, you're going to see construction starting 6 months later. Then I also wanted to touch on the west site. So obviously we need to look to select 2 FBOs, and with the issues surrounding a lot of those questions, and as I mentioned, the west site has a lot more of those T hangers that will potentially be displaced and needing some phasing to be able to hopefully accommodate as many or all of those tenants somewhere else on the airport, with hopefully some construction moving forward on the east site that would be able to accommodate some of it. The west site process, we haven't fully narrowed down how we want to approach that yet. And I think also the selection criteria may change as well, because if you select one FBO for the east site, you may not want a mirror image of that for the west site, because different FBOs cater to different clientele. And so our goal would be to select the proposer for the east site, get that process really moving forward, but then go to the west site fairly quickly for the selection. Construction may be delayed a little bit with phasing, but really go right into the west site for that selection, whether it be through a full RFP or utilizing the list of people and working with who wasn't selected for the first site, yet to be determined, but definitely don't want to just assume that we're going to have 2 mirror FBOs facing each other out here, because they could augment each other's services depending on what and who their focus customers are. And now, Levi, we've been to the place where if you have some other questions you would like to ask or direction that you want to give us, happy to receive that input.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to slide 6 and the overhead map there to try to get a better understanding myself for what that space is, what we're looking at. So the area, the carve out in the top rightish area there, that's the building we're in right now. Is that right? The little U-shaped.
The carve out is actually the restaurant.
That's the restaurant.
So
okay.
If you look at the line that splits the 2 parcels, that goes right through the middle of this building.
Okay. Okay, so the restaurant is not part of the FBO redevelopment at this time.
It is now. So this was out of the master plan,
Okay.
and that has been amended. So that restaurant is actually a part of the FBO's available area now as well.
Part of that eastern 22.4 acre parcel
Correct.
is now a little slightly larger,
Yes.
by a quarter acre or less. Okay, so on the east site, the proposal is to have 2 FBOs. So take the current signature space and turn that into 2 FBOs.
So when I say the east site, I'm referring to the 22.4 acre side.
Okay.
And the west site would be that 22.6. Both of them will be in the northeast corner of the airport, but that is the 2 FBOs that we would have.
And then what would become of what is presently Atlantic on the west side of the parallel runways?
So that side of the airport, we are not looking to move forward with a 3rd FBO.
Mm-hmm.
It really, Atlantic is doing a fine job of operating an FBO over there, but it is not set up well for an FBO. There's just not enough ramp space, and it's a tricky area to work out of. So the primary focus for the northwest quadrant of the airport would be on that smaller GA element or flight school, things like that aren't necessarily accommodated by the FBOs, but still allow for some growth of general aviation here at Santa Barbara.
Okay. Do you see the current Atlantic site, for lack of a better term, operating throughout construction until it's completed here, or has that yet to be determined, the timelines for all of this?
So obviously there's some flexibility with the timelines depending on who the proposers are and how all of that is going to work. But we will be starting with the east site,
Mm-hmm.
and for both of the FBOs, depending on who is selected, if it's the current ones, obviously easier, but if it's not the current ones, the new entrant will be expected to continue to run an FBO in that site and phase their construction around still having an operation. So obviously the west site will be a little bit easier because the area where Atlantic is operating will continue to operate until that is complete. But like I said, it's a challenging area. It doesn't meet the requirements or needs of even what Atlantic deals with right now. They're space constrained.
Right. Okay. Understood.
A question as far as the small GA piston aircraft that will be displaced by this. Are we looking into temporary locations, maybe the other side of the field, or how do we relieve that dynamic.
So thank you. You're getting into those questions where I mentioned we don't have answers to all of these questions, and a lot of it's going to be determined by who is selected and how we work with them and what their proposal is. So I would anticipate that there's going to be a lot of focus on some of the larger aircraft, and that's who the FBOs serve. Our master plan tells us what the demand is for general aviation for the different fleet sizes. And so as we look through this process and we select the FBOs, that will be top of mind is how many of the different fleet sizes will be accommodated and how does that align with our master plan? And then if it is short in an area, say for the small single engine piston aircraft, that's where we have to look at the projects in the master plan to expand the facilities for those on our own, not through the FBO potentially. Unfortunately, we have maybe a postage size stamp of space that is not leased out right now. And so our flexibility is very small. So we definitely will be partnering with whoever the new entrants or existing FBOs are that are maintained here on the facility to be as flexible as possible to accommodate our current tenants. I do see a period of time just because of the lack of space that we have available that there hopefully we'll be able to accommodate them all on the field somewhere. There may not be as many hangars initially as we go through this development until space is freed up on the northwest corner of the airport to do those additional hangars shown in the master plan. But our goal would be to try to move forward concurrently with as many projects as possible to meet that demand. But unfortunately, we have to wait for certain people to move out of different areas to be able to construct in those areas.
Well, thank you for that. I'm glad you're working that issue. I know it's everybody's concerned, and hopefully you'll get to base your airplane here someday.
Hopefully. And that is actually probably one of the most challenging things is dealing with the current base tenants during construction because we already don't have enough space.
Thank you.
Will the helo pads be staying in the same place, or are those going to be?
So in our master plan, we currently show, I believe that's Taxiway Foxtrot. Sorry, we renamed everything, and I'm still trying to remember. So we show Taxiway Foxtrot being relocated from its current position to directly on that line, splitting the FBOs. However, I will say, just in recent discussions we've even had with some, potential FBO proposers, it's likely that we may have to make some modifications to how all of that works. And those are some of those questions that until the proposals come in, we can't fully address all of those questions. So one way or the other, that taxiway will be relocated and the helipads will come out. But we will also be looking, as we talked about with our base tenants, what does that mean for those operations and where will they be going to?
And then also, where the grass area is, can the FBOs potentially put hangars there?
So all of the area that's surrounded with the dashed lines for those two parcels is fully developable. However, as you get closer to runways or taxiways, there may be height requirements, there may be other things. So setbacks from the taxiways for safety areas. So yes, you can put hangars into those southern grass areas. As you get closer to the runway, you may be more limited in the height that they can be.
Okay, thank you.
And where would this office go?
So our current thought is what we commonly refer to as the old Deckers building. So if you look at the map, the large hangars where FedEx and Signature and Atlantic have some facilities, just on the back side of it, you'll see a 245. That's building 245. That's where we would likely end up.
Okay, yeah.
Just going through some RFPs for space design actually as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Just one final clarification. So, building off of what Commissioner Grabman said about the area where it says the 2 acreage numbers there, that's fully developable and could become non-movement area. Right now, I think that taxiway, I forget what it's called, is a movement area. Could that be removed and developed and be parking, be buildings and all of that?
So our current master plan shows Taxiway Foxtrot directly up the middle, and it does still show, I think it's Charlie now. Sorry. It does still show Charlie going through there. It could be non-movement, but it still shows keeping it as at least a taxi lane for aircraft.
Okay.
But as I mentioned, depending on how the proposals come in, that could be modified. And so I don't want to commit 100% to that, but that's currently what's shown in the master plan.
Very good. Okay, thanks.
Mo, do we have any speaker slips? Any members of the public want to comment? Questions? All right. We don't need a vote on this, correct? No? You have what you need? Very good. Thank you for that report. Moving on to item number 12. This is you again, correct, Director Hastert?
It is. I had to make sure that
Back
I'm on
to
the
you.
right one. So Mo, can you pull up the noise? So thank you, Chair Glazer. Happy to give you an update on our noise working group. And actually, Commissioner Grabman is a member on that group, and we have a few of the members in the audience, I believe, as well. So I just want to give you a quick. What's that? Oh, I'm sorry. We only appointed one commissioner on there, but I forgot we now have two commissioners on there with Commissioner Bowen. So apologize for that, Paul. So the noise working group was formed to better address the community's issues with the impact of the airport, specifically noise, but somewhat overflights and other things as well. As I was coming on board here at the end of 2022, right? I think so. Obviously, an election year and a lot of issues concerning noise were brought up. And the city of Goleta kind of spearheaded an effort to get the airport to focus in on noise a little bit better. But I will say it's not just the city of Goleta, it's also residents within the city of Santa Barbara, as well as the county unincorporated areas. So the city of Goleta sent a letter to the city of Santa Barbara requesting that we look at a number of different things, which I'll kind of summarize in just a minute. And we brought that to the commission. We ultimately brought that to city council and came up with a recommended action. So I'm here today to give you an update on how that has been going, but then also make a recommendation that we kind of shift gears just a little bit on those recommended actions to have a bigger effect and get things done a little bit quicker. So just so you know, the staff that has been kind of heading up the noise working group has been myself, Jessica Metzger, our airport planner, and Greg Goodsell. Unfortunately, with the move of Greg over to properties, we will be needing to fill in a different staff person to help us out on that. But Jess was nice enough to set up kind of a map with different areas for representation. So you can see we have representatives from all of the different areas that you see up on the screen there. So not all of those residents would agree with what the biggest problem is, because obviously all of those areas have different problems, but it's a very good group that has come together that has been very understanding of the different issues around the airport and is working collaboratively to try to address some of those noise concerns that were both raised in the letters, but then also bringing up some separate ideas. So we've had a total of 4 noise working group meetings so far. The first one was just kind of an introduction and overview of the letters that went back and forth and what we would be looking at, introductions, a better understanding of who we are as staff and who the players are at the table. So I mentioned the community members shown on this diagram. We also have stakeholders. So we have 2 commission members now. We have businesses that are airport tenants that are on there with some expertise in aircraft operations, airline pilot, just a number of different people, and general aviation pilots as well. Oops, sorry. Went too far. The second meeting that we had was more of an educational meeting. So Greg put together a really good presentation to go over what our instrument departures and instrument approaches look like for the airport, so that people understood why people are flying over the areas that they are flying and better understand the tools that we have to work with. Then we had a discussion about the Part 150 noise study process and what that means, as well as a little bit of discussion about where our noise monitors are and what we are actually tracking with those noise monitors. And then we did have a meeting in December. It was not attended by nearly as many of the members, I think just with holidays and other things going on. But we had a small subgroup of the noise committee members on their own as independent citizens went and met with Congressman Carbajal. And then they brought back some information to the committee, in which the full committee then got on board with some of the recommendations that they had come up with to communicate back to Salud Carbajal. And we received a letter back from Salud Carbajal just basically acknowledging his support for trying to reduce noise and what efforts he could take to try to help out with those efforts. And those letters are in the packet that you have. So just taking a step back now, the letter that was sent from the city of Goleta to the city of Santa Barbara, we categorized all of the elements into 3 different categories. One of them is things that the noise working group, things that we should form a noise working group to then try to address, which we have now done. Those are the items that the noise working group was to be focused on. Issues that should be a part of a bigger public process, like an FAA Part 150 noise study. And I'm sorry, I think one of my slides disappeared, or I didn't get it in there. Oh no, I have it in here. And then other items, things that aren't directly related to noise. So I'm going to back up and kind of go through these very quickly. I will say that the noise working group members didn't want to just limit themselves to discussion of just these topics. So we actually hit all of the topics that were in the letters. Now, there are some of the topics that we can't move forward without some other process, but we didn't shy away from talking about any of the topics. So just really quickly going through these, back up one. Develop a charted visual approach. There was a lot of discussion about this, and obviously being out over the water, that's something that's difficult to do. Incentivize noise abatement compliance. There's not been a lot of discussion about that yet, but I know at least one of the noise working group members has some ideas for this, and so this is a topic we will still discuss, but we haven't really hit this one hard yet. Expand the use of proprietary instrument approach. So as I mentioned, the airlines fly a proprietary approach focused on runway 25 right now. That does take them over the Moore Mesa open space and kind of threads the needle of some open area there, although there is still some overflight of some homes as it narrows in. I'm happy to report that we have been communicating with all the airlines, and all 5 are actually utilizing that to the best extent possible. Some aircraft equipment is not able to fly those approaches. It's just it's a very complex approach, and not all of them have the equipment required. Integrate noise abatement in airline negotiations. So we've only done one airline negotiation since then. That was with Delta Airlines. They're flying the quietest airliner that we currently have operating out of Santa Barbara, and definitely on board with anything they can do for noise abatement. Outreach for business jet and charter aircraft. We've done a little bit of outreach with the FBOs and providing some flyers and other things. Still some more work to be done there. And the reason why we haven't hit that as hard, and you'll see that with the recommendations that we have, is we need a little bit better tools to be able to provide to those aircraft flying in and out of here to ask them to utilize than we currently have. And I'll get into that in just a little bit more. And then pilot outreach for noise mitigation. Again, the same thing. Right now, the way that the approaches, instrument approaches are set up, without doing some tweaking, it's hard to ask them to do much better unless we give them some other tools to utilize. Then we talked about the Part 150 noise study items. So one of them was to reinstate the voluntary procedures over the Elwood-Devereaux area. For whatever reason, and I still do not know why, the theory is when UCSB housing went in, the airport, somebody at the airport decided that it wasn't good to have overflight over any built-up areas. Our voluntary noise abatement corridor that kind of curved in from the ocean into runway 7 is not shown anymore on our procedures, although it was shown on some of the past studies. And so this is one that I went both to the commission and then ultimately to council to say I don't feel comfortable just re-implementing something that there has been some changed conditions on the ground. And so we were going to rely on a Part 150 noise process to do that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. Analyze and report on flight procedures. So the noise working group actually did some of this already. And so we looked at some of the different procedures, and I will talk about one of the recommendations that we currently have for departure procedures in just a second. But other than that, what we determined is most of the noise issues that we have is generated by aircraft that are primarily flying on instrument approaches or instrument departures. And if those current instrument approaches or instrument departures that are being utilized have overflight over those areas, there's nothing we can do to change them other than recommend a different departure that may be better, which I will talk about in a minute, or work to get some better approaches into here that they can utilize. Assess a voluntary aircraft noise curfew. This is one that we haven't had any discussion yet with the noise working group, because this is something that has other implications that we need to do much more studying on how it would affect airline schedules, routes, all of that. So it's something that will still be brought up to the noise working group and discussed, but ultimately a lot more input that needs to go into that. Evaluate fleet composition and noise levels. We are very limited in what we can do to dictate what types of aircraft an airline could fly in or out of here. It really factors into how their national fleet is, but I can say that all of the airlines are trying to modernize their fleet. And with that modernization of their fleet comes quieter, more efficient aircraft. So definitely as time goes by, this continues to get better. If we were ever faced with a question of, do you want to use some old MD-80 versus a newer aircraft, of course we would advocate for the newer aircraft. But with the current providers, with the airline service, this isn't something that we see much room for change or improvement. Unfortunately for the airlines, there's a lot of delivery delays with aircraft right now, and they would love to have newer, quieter aircraft flying out of Santa Barbara, but currently awaiting delivery of aircraft. And then develop fly quiet procedures for takeoff and arrival. And as I mentioned, we want to definitely promote fly quiet procedures. We need to give them some more tools to be able to fly quiet. So if you look at this diagram, this is for departures. This shows where most of our instrument departures would go out using the mission departure and the gouge departure. And you can see that the ones that are affected to the worst degree are those to the west of the airport, over all of Goleta. A lot of those are pretty much straight out until you get close to the water. Some of them turn out a little bit earlier. And then going to the, flying from here to the east, taking off on runway 7, you can see a lot of them actually turn out a little earlier than what we would like to be over that open space that is kind of highlighted in that teal color. Now, that was one of the things that was mentioned earlier in the director's report. With one of those changes to a departure, it changes how that turnout from the airport is. And so we want to wait and see how it affects that the path that you see on here with actual flights, because it has a potential to actually get it closer to that open space, but it really depends on aircraft performance. So one of the things that was brought up at the noise working group was, are there better departures? And so if you look at the flout or the Quang departure, and I know it sounds technical, but these are FAA instrument departures that dictate how you depart from the aircraft or from the airport. So the flout and the Quang departures, the one on the left here shows the flout departures. It shows basically a turnout towards the ocean, not immediately on departure, but I can't read it off of the screen right here, but upon reaching an altitude or something like that. So we had some discussions with the air traffic control tower about, can we ask people to utilize these departures more than the ones that are flying over Goleta? And so the answer was, it does cause them some challenges with traffic. And so our current approach to this is to try to utilize these departures at a minimum before the tower opens. There's a lot less traffic. It really shouldn't create any issues. And if we can get the airlines taking off at 5 a.m. to turn out over the water quicker, that was seen as a benefit. So that is something we are actively moving forward with currently. This just shows another diagram that Greg had come up with, just showing the tightest turning departure jet tracks for one of the months that we had. And so it can be done. You can turn out over the water a little quicker than going directly over all of Goleta. One of the other things that, even though it was outside of the scope of both the noise working group or even the airport to try to look at, were two other items. One of them is to monitor aircraft emissions. This is something that's becoming a bigger issue in the area, and definitely something that we're keeping our eye on, but we do not track aircraft emissions currently. However, the noise working group members at our December meeting, or I think it was a December meeting, pointed out that all of the work that we are doing to try to turn out aircraft over the water faster and avoid flying over homes helps with the emissions issue. So even though we're not directly addressing it, any improvements that we are able to make still benefits that item. And the other one was a request to amend the Airport Commission charter, which is actually the city charter. And although that is not moving forward, we did work to let the city of Goleta know when those positions were coming up, and they actually made a recommendation for a commission member, and I'm happy to report that was Commissioner Bowen. So that process is worked as well as it could within the existing system to get some representation from Goleta onto the commission. So that was just a quick update for what was currently going on, but the recommended changes that we have would be, and this was a unanimous decision of all the noise working group members, was to, I put postpone/cancel. Ultimately, we would love to just cancel the Part 150 noise study process, but if for whatever reason we're not successful in accomplishing what we need to accomplish through an alternative process, that's still on the table. That's something that we can bring back at any time. So that's why for now I'm just saying postpone the Part 150 noise process. That's about $1 million study that takes over a year to complete. Does have a very active public engagement process as a part of that. But ultimately, when we look at what the FAA is doing right now as far as funding for noise programs, all of it is dictated on the 65 decibel noise contour. And unfortunately, the aircraft noise for Santa Barbara Airport in the impacted areas are all outside of that. So the likelihood of this process being successful in actually putting any funding towards any work to reduce noise over those communities is really not likely to be very successful. Our congressman was successful in getting some additional funding put forward for noise for airports. Unfortunately, it's still all under the old system. So if you look at his letter, he's committed to trying to make some of those funds available for something outside of that, but understanding the FAA process, my expectations are low. So really what was decided was, because the approaches to the airport, the instrument approaches that the business jet aircraft and the commercial airlines are using, the primary issue that we have and what's dictating where they fly, that we should look to see if we can't get some better instrument approaches into the Santa Barbara Airport for both ends of the airport. And so this could work for approaches or departures, but just kind of mirroring the approach that we have off to the 25 side, off on the runway 7 side. And so I won't go into all of the details, but we were able to find the Truckee Tahoe Airport had actually done a study, hired a consultant, and has public use private approaches that are now available for their airport because they had similar issues. And so we started to recommend to go down that route. And with that, the airport would be required to maintain those approaches. If there's changes with the magnetic variation and things like that, you have to continually maintain approaches. So there would be some ongoing costs. But then in further research, our neighbors just to the south with the Ventura County Department of Airports are going through 2 Part 150 noise studies for their airports, Oxnard and Camarillo. On their own, they came to a very similar decision, and it was kind of funny because we should have just started with them rather than looking at other places. But they have hired a consultant outside of that Part 150 noise process because they saw a need as well. And that consultant consists of retired FAA employees using the same software that the FAA uses, and their expectation is they will be able to take these specially designed approaches and hand them over to the FAA to maintain and publish into the future. So our recommendation for now would be to take the noise working group's recommended action of postponing the postponing the Part 150 noise study, and moving forward with procuring a contract with a consultant to develop approaches into the airport, but then also to look at our departures as well, because maybe there's some modifications that we could look at for that also wouldn't cause the impacts for air traffic that are out there. As you can see, just to kind of demonstrate the point a little bit, this is our VOR GPS into runway 25. And so that is actually fairly close to what we would want, although it'd be nice to keep them offshore even further before they came into the airport. But looking at the other side of the airport, most of the approaches just bring you in straight in right over the city. And so obviously, as we mentioned earlier in the director's report, there's the instrument landing system, and that does bring you in direct over the city. Everybody understands that if we're at minimums and it's inclement weather, that's still likely to happen. But we have many beautiful days here in Santa Barbara, and the likelihood of them being able to use a different approach when the weather is good will alleviate a lot of that noise. And with that, I would open it up to any questions and just a general consensus to just see if we're on the track that the commission kind of agrees with.
Commissioners?
Of course, I have questions, but first off, you and your staff, I think, have been doing a great job in organizing the noise working group and keeping us from going off the rails. So thank you for that. Not mentioned is the timeline for how soon we can get people doing the departures that turn them out over the ocean as soon as possible. So how long?
Yeah, so one of the next big tasks that I have is to take all of the information that we've now determined and have some real sit-down meetings with air traffic control. And so now that holidays are past and all of that, I anticipate trying to work that out with their tower manager very quickly and instantly start spreading that word to the airlines to start with, because those are the ones that are primarily flying at those morning flights, but then just putting it out as well. So I would say the major portion of that word is going to go out probably the end of this month, beginning of next month.
So that would mean possibly by the end of next month, some people in Western Goleta could sleep in a little later?
That's what we would hope for. And then obviously, depending on what challenges arise with air traffic, or one of the concerns is that if they request that approach, that air traffic will automatically just change it to one of the other ones. So a little bit to work out, but I think that's probably the quickest action that we will be taking.
I think that's great. You're doing a good job on that. And what I remember is that was your baby. You brought it to us and suggested it.
I wish I could take credit, but that was Gordon Feingold that actually brought it to my attention. But,
Gordon's a good
I'll give
guy.
him credit.
Thank you.
Got item number 13 coming up, and certainly this is timely with everything that's going on with climate change in our local environment. So certainly happy to introduce this one. Sorry, Director Hastert, were you starting on this one? Were you introduce? Yeah, thank you.
I'm just going to introduce Jessica Metzger, our airport planner, to do this presentation so I can stay quiet for a while.
Yes, thank you, commissioners. I just wanted to give you a brief history before our consultant takes over. So we actually started looking at grants for this project back in early 2022. And by the end of 2022, we had received 2 separate grants from the Coastal Commission, and we're able to bring ESA on by March of 2023 to start this project. And so we have Amber Ings here, who is going to give the presentation.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here. I'm an engineer and hydrologist with ESA, Environmental Science Associates, and I'll be sharing with you all about the Climate Vulnerability Assessment and Risk Evaluation. It's actually part 1 of a 3-part or 3-phase kind of project of the Climate Adaptation Plan. And so the presentation serves just as an update to what this assessment includes and our results so far. I'd love to get into the nitty-gritty of giving you all the information about our modeling and analyses, but I'm not going to bore you with all of that. I'm just going to give you the results and then talk to you about next steps. And then if you could hold your questions for the end, just so I can get through it quickly. I know it's the last one of the night, so I'll use my clicker. So here, overview and purpose. So the overall purpose of the climate vulnerability assessment is to inform the adaptation planning in light of climate change and sea level rise. And like Jessica was saying, this was made possible by a grant received by the Coastal Commission and builds upon two major planning efforts the city completed, including the City of Santa Barbara Adaptation Plan and the Goleta Slough Management Plan, which was in 2015. Clicker. All right, a little background and flood history. So I'm just going to run you guys through how we went about this process. The vulnerability assessment focus is on sea level rise and climate change. Why do I say and climate change? Sea level rise is part of climate change, but I say and climate change because we ended up doing an analysis on the precipitation increase from climate change, and that's actually a pretty big part of this analysis. So I'll run through the historic and current flooding on the airport, and we use that baseline of current flooding and historic flooding to do our flood hazard analyses. And when I say flood hazard analyses, I mean creek flooding, lagoon flooding, precipitation, groundwater emergence, all of the possible flooding that could happen on site. And we looked at the assets of the airport and the vulnerability to these assets. And additionally, we looked at the economy. How does it affect the economy of the airport, and how does it affect the habitat on site? All right, so this is really small. You won't be able to see it well, but our sea level rise is based on the 2024 OPC sea level rise guidance, and that's a state of California guidance. It just rolled out with the new 2024, actually during our analysis, so we updated our sea level rise amounts. And what we chose for this analysis was intermediate high risk. So you have a choice in the OPC. You could look at high risk, intermediate low risk. And we chose the intermediate high risk. And so we have 3 different sea level rise scenarios. One is in the near term, and that kind of near term starts at 2048. And then we're looking at the midterm. The midterm's around 2076 starting, and then the long term, which would start around 2130. And the near term is 0.8 feet of sea level rise. So that's about a foot of sea level rise as soon as about 2050. And then 2.5 feet of sea level rise for the midterm and 6.6 feet of sea level rise in the long term. All right, so I'm going to go through our results quickly with you all to kind of give you an overview of what we found. In this map, you could see we've looked at all the historical flooding that we could find that's on record for the airport. The predominant areas we were looking at were the northwest quadrant and flooding of runways that cause airport closure and the flooding of the entire airport property. Let me back up a little bit and explain that better. So we had to figure out kind of like a flooding threshold. So how would these 3 different thresholds change with sea level rise and climate change? We wanted kind of like a baselines to build upon. So in like a lower storm event that causes just flooding in the northwest quadrant, how is that going to change with sea level rise and climate change? In an event that causes the runways to flood and the airport to close, what kind of events, how is that going to change in the future? And then flooding of the entire airport property, which right now happens at a probability of about once every 100 years. How is that going to change in the future? Okay. So for our precipitation modeling results, this is kind of the climate change I was discussing. We have models that go in, there's like global models, and we've put this model into like a specific region and specifically right at the airport scale of figuring out how the precipitation may change in the future, which we've actually kind of seen in the past couple of years, it's been interesting. So usually an event that happens once every 5 years, we'd call it like a 5-year event on site. That is 5.5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours. Our model predicted that this will change to be an event that'll happen every 2.5 years in the future, and an event that gives us 7.5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours, which happens once every 20 years in the past, is predicted to happen once every 5 years in the future. And that's the event that closes the airport. So it was once every 20 years probability standard, and that will change to about once every 5 years is predicted. And then the event that would happen once every 50 years is projected to happen once every 20 years. So this is important for our results and what we're looking at. I know there's a lot of data on this table, but so we compared the past precipitation scenario to existing or future precipitation scenario, and then we added on the sea level rise from there. Because what we've found actually is that the flooding in the airport is mostly caused by creek flooding. It's not the lagoon, it's not the ocean flooding right now. It's mainly creek flooding. So we're seeing how is that changing in future precipitation or with climate change, and then let's add on the sea level rise to see how it additionally changes. So right now, that northwest, if a flood event that floods mostly just the northwest quadrant, right now has a 12% chance in the year of happening. So 12% chance any given year of that area to flood. And future precipitation, that's about a 30% chance of happening. And then with 0.8 feet of sea level rise, it doesn't change much with that amount of sea level rise. But when you add on more sea level rise, 2.5 feet, that's 100% chance of that happening every year. 100% chance at the northwest quadrant and edges of the runway flooding. Are you guys with me still? Are we on all the data? I know. All right, so this next one, which actually closes the airport, I know is very important, obviously. So with past precipitation, this probability is 7% chance of happening in a given year. And with future precipitation, that bumps up to, like we saw, like a 5-year event, which is a 20% chance. And the same thing with sea level rise. It doesn't change or exasperate that flooding very much. But with 2.5 feet of sea level rise, it does. And 6.6 feet of sea level rise, it would happen every year. And then the entire airport flooding. So what year was that event? I'll go back to the picture really quick because it's interesting. So that was a 1995 event. Where else do we see it? What other year? Mostly it was the 1995. So an event like that is projected, it has a 1% chance of happening, right? It's a 100-year event. And actually triples with future precipitation, making it 3% chance. And then similarly with sea level rise, there's not as much of a risk of that, increasing that until you reach 6.6 feet of sea level rise, or between 2.5 and 6.6. So those intense precipitation events are predicted to occur more frequently. Boop, boop, boop. Okay. The next one I want to show you is part of our analysis was a storm drain analysis. Moffitt and Nickel, who's been working on the master plan, helped us with this analysis on the storm drains. And right now, even in a 5-year event without sea level rise, you could see the flooding. The picture on the bottom left shows the flooding around the runways and around the airport assets without sea level rise. So, and we compared it with a future 5-year, which is like a 20-year. And you could see how the flooding increases. And then with sea level rise, it does marginally increase that flooding. So to summarize the flood hazard results, the existing and historic flooding is actually dominated by rainfall runoff and creek flooding. And the projected increase in precipitation increases the flood risk double to triple. But good news is up to 2.5 feet of sea level rise, it does not have a huge effect on flood risk. But when you reach the 2.5, it does increase flood risk at the airport. And then with 6.6 feet of sea level rise, you'll have regular runway flooding. I mean, it's tidal at that point. You know, a tide would flood the runway. Okay, so this part, the vulnerability assessment, we're now going to look at specific assets on the airport and how they're affected. Not only how they're affected, but what assets are most sensitive, which have the highest vulnerability. I know you can't really see this. But the colors are based on different exposure levels. Red is high exposure, orange is medium exposure, and yellow is low exposure. So for our asset exposure analysis, we had 3 factors that we were from hazard exposure. So from from low, like least likely, to high, which is more likely flooded, and then sensitivity. So an asset that has low sensitivity, there's low impact to the asset function. So what I'm trying to say is that asset could get flooded. It doesn't affect how the asset's working properly, right? But if it is highly sensitive to flooding, that's a higher exposure, and that could cause significant damage to that asset. And then the last one is adaptive capacity. So that's the ability of an asset to change in response to the hazard exposure with rising sea levels. So if it has a high adaptive capacity, it could be easily modified with your flood. But if it has a low adaptive capacity, it's hard to change it. The runway elevation, it's hard to change. Okay, so what we found was that the highest asset vulnerabilities are the ones I've circled here, and I'll say them out loud so you know. The Northwest General Aviation aprons, the runways 15, I don't know how you all say these out loud, but the 15 right, 33 left, and 15 left, 33 right. Is that how? Oh, cool. Okay, the glide slope antenna and the RVR and the remote transmitter receiver, the ATC tower, and the sanitary sewer infrastructure and storm drain infrastructure. And if you want to see the medium asset vulnerabilities, those are all in the staff report. And then our report will be available to you all as well. And you could see all the vulnerabilities and how we chose all the assets. Okay, operations. So for airport operations vulnerability, very few asset flood impacts would restrict aircraft operations at the airport. But the highest operations vulnerability is disembarking at the terminal, closure of private aviation operations, and closure of commercial runways. All right, and I will give you all, so let's go back to I forget if the habitat change is after or before, but we're going to go on the economic analysis results too. So what does this mean in dollar signs? All right, the economic findings show that in an average storm right now, runway closure is about 21 hours, resulting in 21 canceled flights. For severe floods, so a flood that happened February last year and January of the year before, that could lead to a 25-hour closure and 34 cancellations. And we've analyzed that the flooding related cost will rise until about 2.5 to 3.3 feet of sea level rise, where the airport may become non-operational in general. And the estimated total losses from an average storm through 2075 could reach $68 million, while severe storms might incur losses of $158 million. And more, passengers are projected to bear up to 71% of the losses, while airlines face significant operational losses from increased costs. Airport revenue losses during shutdowns are estimated at $120,000 a day, or $8,500 an hour. And those losses are calculated in 2024 dollars. General aviation is less affected due to flexibility because they could access alternate airports. And I'll also say that our consultant we use for the economics it's not us. I don't know what I'm talking about here. This is CEDO, and they're a local consulting firm that does socioeconomics. So I'll try to answer any questions about that, but I'll more lead to them. Okay, so I also wanted to give you guys a heads up on the habitat change results. So, with sea level rise, the land it's going to migrate upward. So usually the habitat will migrate upward as well. And right now, currently at the airport, it's mostly high marsh. And so we see it moving more to low to mid marsh. And then with so much sea level rise, you'll have a situation with the habitat that it'll be mostly subtidal and mud flat. So you kind of lose your habitat at that point. Not for moving birds, but for marsh species, because they won't be able to migrate upslope anymore. It'll just go to mud flat. And public outreach. So we had a workshop last week at the Relief Building, and our public comment period is open from December 11th to January 16th. So it's open for everyone to comment. We'd love your comments, and you can go ahead and read the report. It's available on the airport website. So next steps, what are we going to do with all this information? Why did we do this? Well, we want to figure out how to adapt to the rise in the flood levels and sea level rise. So here's a couple of the types of adaptation options that our firm endorses and helps prepare. So it's like an accommodation type of adaptation, protecting our current assets, and retreating. And then there's hybrid options as well. So I could go through some of these if you all are interested, but the approach is, I want to say it's more nature-based as much as possible and low cost, and then, you do what you need to do, hard protection when it's needed. And I know the master plan has also come up with adaptation strategies that are planning to get implemented. So after this adaptation plan, then there's going to be more community engagement, and then after that, we're going to update the local coastal plan, the LCP. All right, you've all made it. So do you have questions?
It's a lot to,
I know.
lot to ponder.
It is.
But the
Tempted to
writing's
put
on the
more.
wall.
The writing's on the wall. You've seen it. Not
I-
this year, but
I have one
Yes.
question and a comment, maybe. I know you said that your office didn't handle the economic impact, but I'm wondering if you can speak to maybe how they calculated that. Is that impact based on passengers being diverted, having to buy a hotel? I mean, what kind of factors into? Because it seems high. One 24-hour closure could be $68.5 million of loss. So how do they arrive at that number? Any idea?
I only know as much as written in the report, really, and
Okay.
I'm not sure.
All right. And then
I know they looked at a lot of factors.
Yeah. My other comment would be, I am interested in what some of the mitigation would be, particularly in the short term. But I mean, when you see something like this, you say, well, in 2170, what do we do? The airport's flooded every time it rains. How do we operate here? It's a long way off, but it's something to think about as you're making a 50-year investment in something like a redevelopment plan. So maybe that's a question for Director Hastert. I'm not sure.
So, sure, Leo, I one of the things that we're looking at is short-term and a little bit longer-term implementations, but ultimately we're waiting for this study to wrap up to where we can look at even further down the road and what we may need to do. So the current planning is really focused on the immediate need, not so much the changed conditions that we see on the slide here today.
Well, that makes sense, yeah.
If I may, Mr. Commissioner, I believe that 68 million was the
Go back.
the 218,000 through 2075. So that
Totaled.
right
Cumulative.
So,
Okay.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
for the next until 2075.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amber, thank you first for a nice report. A little discouraging to know that long after I'm gone, this airport will go too, because we can't fight the sea. Being here since the 80s, a lot has changed as far as the creeks coming down to the airport. A lot of very good work has been done. So when we're comparing historical flooding at this airport to today, we have much, much better situation as far as the creeks go. I'm assuming that was taken into account in your study.
Yes, Commissioner. So we've looked at how the creek alignment has changed and how the watershed has changed. There's more development. There's actually more runoff now than there was previously. There has been work to make concrete line channels and flow more, what's the word? It's easier to get to the ocean quicker. However, there's actually more runoff coming from the watershed now.
Absolutely. One of the other big issues for us here historically, the opening of the sand berm to the ocean greatly affects the amount of flooding. When I first came here, an airport employee would jump in a backhoe and just cruise over the beach and carve it open every winter. And obviously we don't do that anymore. In your studies, are you assuming that that berm is broken open, or you're putting in the worst case scenario where we have to leave it intact?
We've done both. So we know that in the past, the Flood Control District has also managed the berm opening. We did a model of, it's called the Quantified Conceptual Model of the lagoon opening and closure. And we do studies of it closed. And so the flood levels right before the breach event and after the breach event. So we're looking at, before and after the breaching, because like you're saying, Commissioner, right before that berm breaches, when it reaches that berm height, that's the flood level you're going to have, and the water will back up behind the berm, and until it breaches, then you'll have the clear path for the water to get through. But sometimes the tide is so high that it governs. So we looked at all of those scenarios.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Do we have a speaker slip? Sean?
Hi, as you're aware, I'm the owner of Above All Aviation, and when you're doing these economic findings, it'd be really great to include the GA. I see that you say it's not that much of an impact, but we had over 40 flights canceled during these floodings because we have lessons going throughout the day. And so it is a big financial impact to us. So it'd be nice to see those numbers represented, because I know the FBOs also I can't go use a different airport if I'm stuck here. So it'd be nice to see those numbers reflected for GA as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Any other comments? Seeing none, I think this is our last item, correct? We stand adjourned. 7:46.